The moment I heard the words "Ma'am, step away from the property or we'll remove you," my heart dropped, but not from fear. From disbelief. Because the woman standing calmly in our driveway, hands folded, voice steady, was my wife. And the furious woman screaming into her phone, demanding police intervention, had absolutely no idea she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. It was a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the neighborhood feels frozen in time. Birds chirping, sprinklers ticking, kids still asleep. My wife and I were unloading groceries when Karen, our HOA self-appointed enforcer, stormed across the street like she owned the asphalt beneath her feet. Her clipboard was tucked under her arm, sunglasses perched low, lips tight with entitlement. We'd seen this look before. It always meant trouble. She accused us of violating HOA rules. Again. This time, it was our guest parking in front of our own house. My wife calmly explained the bylaws, even quoting the exact clause Karen was misinterpreting. That only made things worse. Karen's face turned red, her voice rose, and suddenly she was dialing 911 with dramatic flair. "I want her removed," Karen snapped into the phone, pointing directly at my wife. "She's trespassing. She's refusing to comply. I feel threatened." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My wife didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She simply stood there, eyes steady, letting Karen dig her own hole. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Phones came out. Karen loved an audience. Within minutes, the distant wail of sirens grew louder. Karen smirked, folding her arms like a victorious general. She whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "You're about to learn a hard lesson." 2 state police vehicles pulled up, not local patrol cars. That alone made Karen pause. The officers stepped out, sharp, professional, eyes scanning the scene. One of them looked at my wife, and froze. His posture changed instantly. He straightened, nodded, and quietly said, "Ma'am." Karen blinked. Confused. Still confident. My wife finally spoke. "Officer," she said calmly, "I'm going to need your report on why 911 was misused." The color drained from Karen's face. Because in that moment, she realized too late that the woman she tried to have removed wasn't just anyone. She ran the state police. Karen's confidence collapsed the second the officer addressed my wife with quiet respect. You could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as she tried to recalibrate the situation. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In Karen's world, police showed up, listened to her, and enforced whatever version of the rules she invented that day. But now, the air felt different, heavier, sharper. The officer who had spoken first cleared his throat and turned to his partner. "Let's confirm details before proceeding," he said carefully. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried weight. Karen immediately jumped in, her voice rising again, trying to reclaim control. "She's refusing to leave private HOA property," Karen insisted, jabbing her finger toward our driveway. "I told her multiple times. She's being hostile." My wife remained still. No crossed arms. No smirk. Just patience. The kind of patience that comes from knowing exactly how this will end. The second officer asked Karen a simple question. "Ma'am, can you explain how this individual is trespassing on her own residence?" Karen opened her mouth, then closed it. She tried again. "Well, technically the HOA." "Ma'am," the officer interrupted gently, "HOAs don't override state law or property deeds." That's when the murmurs started. Neighbors had fully gathered now, forming a loose semicircle. Phones were no longer discreet. Karen noticed. Her cheeks flushed, and her voice sharpened into something defensive. "I called 911 because I felt threatened," she snapped. "That's my right." My wife finally turned to face her fully. "Feeling threatened isn't the same as being threatened," she said calmly. And knowingly making a false emergency report is a serious issue. Karen laughed nervously. Oh please. You don't scare me. But the officers weren't laughing. One of them stepped aside and spoke quietly into his radio, eyes never leaving Karen. The other asked my wife if she wished to formally identify herself. She nodded once and reached into her purse, pulling out her credentials. She handed them over without ceremony. The officer looked down. Then back up. His jaw tightened. Yes, ma'am, he said immediately, handing them back with both hands. Karen saw the exchange. She stepped forward, peering, squinting. What is that supposed to mean? She demanded. The officer turned to her, voice firm now. It means you've escalated the situation unnecessarily. Karen's voice cracked. I just wanted her removed. And instead, the officer replied, you may have created a record that follows you. The street was silent. Karen finally understood she wasn't in charge anymore. Karen's shoulders stiffened as the officer began explaining, in painfully clear terms, what misuse of emergency services actually meant. Each word felt like a brick stacking itself onto her situation, building a wall she could no longer climb. She tried to interrupt, to talk over him, but authority had shifted, and she could feel it slipping through her fingers. This call is being documented, the officer said evenly. False claims, intimidation, and harassment are all noted. Karen shook her head hard. This is ridiculous. I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing community rules. My wife spoke again, her tone professional, almost instructional. HOA authority doesn't extend to law enforcement action. And calling 911 to remove a homeowner is not enforcement, it's abuse of the system. Karen scoffed, but her voice trembled. You think you're better than everyone else? No, my wife replied. I think rules apply to everyone. One of the officers asked Karen to step aside so they could complete statements. That request alone seemed to shatter her remaining composure. Being told what to do, especially in front of neighbors, was something she wasn't used to. This is harassment. Karen yelled, waving her hands. They're ganging up on me. The officer raised his palm. Ma'am, calm down or you will escalate this further. That's when something unexpected happened. A neighbor stepped forward. Then another. One by one, people Karen had bullied for years found their voices. They mentioned fines, threats, warnings taped to doors. Someone even brought printed emails. The story Karen had carefully controlled was unraveling in real time. My wife listened quietly, not interrupting, not reacting. She didn't need to. The pattern was forming all on its own. The officer took notes. Lots of notes. Karen's face drained of color. You can't do this, she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. We're not doing anything, the officer replied. We're recording what already happened. Karen suddenly turned to my wife, desperation replacing anger. Can we just forget this? I won't bother you again. My wife met her eyes. This was your choice the moment you dialed 911. The officer handed Karen a card. You may be contacted for follow-up. Karen stared at it like it was radioactive. The police didn't remove my wife. They left Karen standing there exposed, documented, and no longer untouchable. And this was only the beginning. The police cars pulled away, but the tension didn't leave with them. It lingered in the air, thick and uncomfortable, settling over the street like fog after a storm. Karen stood frozen for a moment, clutching that officer's card as if it might bite her. Then, slowly, reality began to sink in. Neighbors didn't scatter like they usually did after one of Karen's outbursts. This time, they stayed. Whispering. Watching. Remembering. Karen tried to recover. She straightened her posture, lifted her chin, and forced a laugh that fooled no one. Well, she said loudly, "that was a misunderstanding." No one responded. She glanced around, clearly expecting support. Normally, someone would nod, someone would mutter agreement, someone would back her authority. But today, the silence was deafening. People who had once avoided eye contact were now openly staring at her. She turned back toward us, eyes sharp again. "This isn't over," she warned, trying to sound threatening. My wife didn't flinch. "You're right," she said calmly. "It isn't." That single sentence seemed to drain the last bit of fight out of Karen. She spun on her heel and marched back to her house, slamming the door hard enough to rattle nearby windows. Later that afternoon, something unusual happened. Our neighbors came over. Not one or two but several. Some brought coffee. Others brought stories. Long, pent-up stories they'd never dared share before. They talked about fines for imaginary violations. About warnings issued without notice. About intimidation, public shaming, and threats of legal action over trivial things. Karen's power had always relied on isolation, keeping everyone divided, afraid to stand alone. Now, that isolation was gone. My wife listened carefully, taking mental notes. She didn't promise revenge. She didn't encourage outrage. She simply explained options. Lawful ones. Documenting patterns. Filing formal complaints. Requesting audits. Escalating through proper channels. That night, an email went out to the entire HOA. Karen had called an emergency board meeting. The subject line read, "Urgent authority clarification." My wife smiled when she saw it. Because when people rush to clarify authority, it usually means they're about to lose it. Karen thought she could reset the narrative. She had no idea she was already too late. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7 sharp, but by 6:30, the room was already full. Chairs scraped against the floor as neighbors filed in, many of them exchanging nervous glances, as if they couldn't believe they were actually there. For years, attendance had been sparse. Karen liked it that way. Empty rooms made power easy. She arrived 10 minutes late, of course. Clipboard in hand. Tight smile. Controlled breathing. But something was off. The confidence she usually wore like armor looked borrowed tonight, as if it didn't quite fit. She opened the meeting by clearing her throat loudly. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to address some misinformation that's been spreading." No one interrupted. They just listened. Karen launched into a rehearsed speech about HOA authority, community standards, and the importance of respecting leadership. She spoke fast, barely pausing, afraid that silence might invite questions. When she finished, she looked around expectantly. That's when my wife raised her hand. The room shifted. Karen hesitated, then forced a nod. "Yes." My wife stood slowly. Calm. Composed. "I'd like to request that the minutes reflect that the HOA president used emergency services to attempt removal of a homeowner without legal cause." Karen's pen froze mid-air. Before she could respond, another hand went up. Then another. And another. Neighbors who had never spoken in meetings before were suddenly standing, asking about fines, demanding explanations, requesting documentation Karen couldn't produce. Karen tried to regain control. "This meeting is getting out of hand," she snapped. "No," someone said quietly, "it's finally in hand." My wife spoke again. "I'm also formally requesting a review of the HOA's enforcement practices, financial penalties, and communication records." Karen laughed, sharp and brittle. "You can't just demand that." "I can," my wife replied. "And others can too." Heads nodded around the room. The board members exchanged uneasy looks. They weren't used to scrutiny. Karen noticed. Panic flickered across her face. She adjourned the meeting abruptly. Too abruptly. People didn't leave right away. They stayed, talking, connecting, realizing they weren't alone anymore. Karen rushed out. And for the first time, she wasn't being followed. She was being watched. The days after the meeting were strangely quiet. No violation notices. No warning emails. No sudden inspections. Karen had gone silent, and that silence told us everything. When people who thrive on control stop making noise, it's usually because they're scrambling behind the scenes. Neighbors began comparing notes. Email chains surfaced. Letters were scanned. Fine statements were stacked on kitchen tables. What looked like isolated incidents turned into a pattern: dates, wording, threats, and penalties repeating with mechanical precision. Karen hadn't just enforced rules, she'd weaponized them. My wife helped organize everything, teaching neighbors how to document properly. Timelines were created. Originals preserved. No opinions, just facts. No emotion, just evidence. It was methodical, boring work, the kind that wins cases. Meanwhile, Karen tried damage control. She sent out a follow-up email claiming procedural improvements were coming. She reminded everyone to keep communication respectful. The tone was softer, almost polite, but the fear underneath was obvious. Authority doesn't apologize unless it's under threat. Then came the audit request. 3 board members, 2 of them Karen's longtime allies, signed off on it. That was the moment her power truly cracked. Money leaves fingerprints, and HOAs run on paper trails. Every fine. Every legal letter. Every expense reimbursement. All of it was about to be reviewed. Karen knocked on our door that evening. I opened it. She stood there alone, eyes tired, voice low. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she said. My wife stepped beside me. "You called 911 on me," she replied evenly. Karen swallowed. "I didn't know who you were." "That's the problem," my wife said. "You shouldn't need to know who someone is to follow the law." Karen asked for understanding. She hinted at stress. Volunteering. Pressure. None of it mattered anymore. Consequences had a schedule, and they were already moving. As she walked away, I realized something important. Karen wasn't afraid of my wife's title. She was afraid of the process she'd triggered. Because systems don't get tired. They don't back down. And they don't forget. That night, messages flew through group chats and private threads. People shared resources, attorneys, and steps they'd never known existed. Fear turned into focus. Silence turned into coordination. No one wanted revenge, they wanted relief. They wanted fairness. For the first time, neighbors felt protected by rules instead of punished by them. Karen had unknowingly unified the very community she controlled through division. The process was slow, unemotional, and unstoppable. And while no one said it out loud, everyone understood the same truth: once momentum starts, it doesn't stop for apologies. What came next would test Karen in ways no clipboard ever could: control, power, accountability. The official letter arrived on a Wednesday morning, slipped neatly into mailboxes across the neighborhood. Thick paper. Formal language. The kind of envelope that makes your stomach tighten before you even open it. By noon, everyone had read it. By evening, everyone knew what it meant. The HOA was under formal review. Not a warning. Not a suggestion. A review initiated through proper channels, backed by documentation, witness statements, and financial records. The kind of review that doesn't end with a slap on the wrist. The kind that asks uncomfortable questions and expects honest answers. Karen didn't come outside that day. By Thursday, rumors spread fast. Karen had contacted an attorney. Then another. Then another. Some neighbors said she was furious. Others said she was panicking. The truth was probably both. For years, Karen controlled the narrative. Now, the narrative was written in ink, not attitude. An emergency board meeting was announced, closed session this time. That alone raised eyebrows. Transparency had never been Karen's strength. Closed doors made people nervous, but they also made one thing clear: damage control was in full swing. One board member resigned before the meeting even happened. That resignation mattered more than any speech Karen could give. It signaled fracture. Loyalty was cracking under pressure, and once people start leaving, others follow. Power hates isolation. When the meeting finally ended, Karen sent out a short email. Just 3 sentences. She claimed cooperation. She asked for patience. She reminded everyone of community values. No threats. No fines. No bold font. Neighbors gathered in driveways that night, talking quietly, cautiously hopeful. No one celebrated. This wasn't about winning. It was about finally breathing. About not flinching every time an email notification chimed. My wife received a call later that evening. Short. Professional. Confirming timelines. Procedures. Next steps. She thanked the caller and hung up. It's moving, she said simply. Karen tried one last time to regain footing. She posted friendly comments on community pages. She waved awkwardly when people passed her house. She even complimented a neighbor's lawn, the same lawn she'd fined twice last year. It didn't work. Because once people see behind the curtain, they don't forget what was hidden there. Karen hadn't just called 911 on the wrong person. She'd activated a system that doesn't respond to charm, intimidation, or excuses. It responds to evidence. And the evidence was overwhelming. The knock wasn't loud. But it was final. The announcement came quietly, almost anticlimactic for something so consequential. A simple email from the interim board, sent early in the morning before most people left for work. No dramatic language. No blame. Just facts laid out in clean, neutral sentences. Karen was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the review. For years, that sentence would have sounded impossible. Karen was the HOA in everyone's mind. Her emails, her warnings, her voice. Seeing her name followed by words like removed from authority felt unreal, like reading a typo that refused to correct itself. By lunchtime, the neighborhood felt lighter. People walked slower. Smiled more. Conversations started again, real ones, not whispered complaints cut short by fear. It wasn't joy exactly. It was relief. The kind that settles into your chest when you realize something heavy is finally gone. Karen didn't respond publicly. No emails. No posts. No door slamming. Her house stayed quiet, curtains drawn. The woman who once patrolled sidewalks with a clipboard had vanished behind closed doors. The interim board held an open forum that evening. Anyone could speak. No time limits. No penalties. One by one, neighbors shared how the HOA had affected them: financial stress, anxiety, sleepless nights. Some voices shook. Others were steady. All were finally heard. My wife didn't speak much. She didn't need to. Her role wasn't to lead the charge, it was to make sure the system worked the way it was supposed to. And now, it was. A proposal passed unanimously that night: revised enforcement procedures, independent oversight, and mandatory training for board members. Transparency replaced intimidation. Process replaced personality. Someone asked what would happen to Karen. The board chair answered carefully. That depends on the findings. No anger. No gloating. Just accountability. Later, as the meeting wrapped up, a neighbor pulled my wife aside. If she hadn't called 911, she said quietly, none of this would have happened. My wife nodded. Power always exposes itself eventually, she replied. Sometimes it just needs a microphone. Karen thought authority meant control. She believed fear was leadership. But authority without limits always collapses under its own weight. She didn't lose power because of who my wife was. She lost it because of what she did. And now, the final chapter of her story was about to be written without her permission. Months later, the neighborhood barely resembled the place it once was. The change wasn't loud or dramatic. There were no banners, no victory speeches, no public shaming. It was quieter than that. Healthier. Rules were still enforced, but now they came with explanations, timelines, and accountability. People no longer feared their inboxes. They trusted the process. The review concluded exactly the way evidence tends to conclude things. Karen was formally removed from the HOA board. The final report cited abuse of authority, misuse of emergency services, improper fines, and a pattern of intimidation. Dry language. Clear conclusions. Consequences attached. Karen didn't issue an apology. She didn't need to. The record spoke for her. On the day the decision was shared, there was no cheering. Just nods. Long breaths. Quiet conversations on porches. Justice, when done correctly, doesn't feel explosive. It feels stabilizing. Karen eventually moved away. Some said it was embarrassment. Others said it was money. Maybe it was both. But what mattered wasn't where she went. It was what she left behind, a community that finally understood its own power. One evening, as my wife and I walked the street, a neighbor thanked her. Then another. Then another. She smiled politely every time and changed the subject. Recognition was never the point. Systems working properly was. You know, I said later, she really thought calling 911 would solve everything. My wife nodded. People who rely on authority instead of integrity always do. The lesson traveled fast. Nearby HOAs revised policies. Boards requested training. Emergency services misuse complaints dropped. All because one woman believed power meant being untouchable and discovered the opposite. Our kids played outside without tension. Neighbors shared tools again. Barbecues returned. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, but it can be rebuilt when fear is removed. Karen's biggest mistake wasn't calling the police. It was assuming the law existed for her convenience. The irony was simple: she tried to remove my wife, and instead, she removed herself. Not through force. Through facts. Through process. Through the very systems she thought she controlled. And that's the part people remember. Not her name. Not her shouting. But the reminder that no title, no clipboard, and no sense of entitlement puts anyone above accountability. Because authority only works when it answers to something greater than ego. And when it doesn't, it always, eventually, answers anyway.